Welcome back to week 31 of our journey through the Word. Last week we began our journey with the judges of Israel, and that journey for them lasted about somewhere around 400 years. And I am making available to you two charts. Once again, you can choose which one you prefer. The one chart will be completely filled out and you can follow it along. Or once again, if you like the challenge of filling in the blanks for yourself, there is a partially filled in chart. What I've done is I've left little breadcrumbs for you along the way. You can fill it in, and if you're feeling like you can't find the answer, then I've left you the scripture references to be able to find them. So you can decide how you want to do that chart, and both are available to you. Once again, as we continue our walk through the Judges, we look at a time when the leadership and the rulers were judges. They weren't kings. Kings are anointed leaders, and their position is permanent, where with judges, they were appointed leaders, not anointed, and it wasn't a hereditary position as a king's position was. And so we see that they are in this time of judges, and also there could be more than one judge. That's why it's difficult to figure out exactly how many years the time of the judges actually was, because there are times then one judge's time of judging might overlap another one's, or one might be a judge in this area and one might be a judge in this area. So it's very difficult to say exactly how long that period of time was. But what we do know is that time and time again through these nearly 400 years, the children of Israel, they would fall into sin and fall into their debauchery and begin to worship the pagan idols. And it says that God would sell them. God sold them, is exactly how he puts it. God sold them into slavery. And they would end up having to serve these nations that they were supposed to have driven out. And God had told them, they're going to be a snare to you. And certainly time and time again through these years, we see that these nations became a snare to them. But why the term God sold them into slavery? Carefully picked words. But as we go back and remember what we read as we were going through the law and see how God views slavery, we will see that these are great words that are chosen. Because remember in the law that the children of Israel were never sold into slavery permanently. And so as we see God sell them into slavery, as we look at it from God's law and from his point of view, this was going to be a temporary status, not a permanent one. And so as God sells them into slavery and they finally come to grips with what they have done, and there is that glimmer of repentance, and they cry out to God, what a merciful, amazing God we see time and time again. When they cry out, God hears their voice and God sends a deliverer. As we go through the book of Judges, we're going to find that there are 12 judges that are mentioned in the book of Judges, and we will walk with each of those judges. Some of those judges we will find we walk with a longer period of time, and some we just barely get to know their name and then move on. And when we come to the end of our journey through the book of Judges, we will have encountered 12 of those judges, but then we will find that there is one more judge after these 12, but we will see that later on. I want us to just briefly look at the fifth judge of Israel. His name is Gideon. When we come to Gideon, we see that his father was an idolater, and that that Gideon has a fear of his father. So his father is a strong man in idolatry, and you will read the story and you will see the truth of that. But when God calls Gideon and tells Gideon, I want you to go and I want you to pull down the idols of your father, and I want you to pull down the idols of the people, and God's going to send him into battle. Time and time again, Gideon needs that reassurance of God that he's hearing from God. And I love watching God's compassion and God's willingness to strengthen Gideon, not just once, but whatever Gideon needs to have his faith strengthened, God is willing and he's patient to give to him. When we look at the fleece that Gideon puts out, and as you read that story, I want you to stop and consider, God wasn't only strengthening Gideon's faith when he puts out the fleece and then he puts it out a second time. God was also encouraging the faith of those who had come to Gideon's aid and to his call, and were also going to be fighting the battle with him. And so God was strengthening their faith as well. As we continue to look at the battle, we see that Gideon has victory, and as Gideon and his men are fighting with the victory of the battle, they call to the Ephraimites to come and help and join in the gleanings of that battle. And so the Ephraimites come, but afterwards, the Ephraimites come and confront Gideon. One of the things we're going to see about Ephraimites is that there's an iniquity in this tribe. And what is that iniquity? That iniquity is pride. We will see the pride of the Ephraimites raise its head more than once. And as we read and listen to Gideon's word, we see that there is a wisdom that Gideon uses in confronting the Ephraimites. And as a result of the wisdom, Gideon pursues the avenue of peace. He panders to their ego. And as a result, the Ephraimites leave in peace. And as I thought about this, and you will see again when they confront another judge, a judge whose name is Jephthah. And it seems as though the Ephraimites love the glory of victory more than they love the victory itself, rather than being excited that they have victory. It was like, wait a minute, you took the glory from us, and you should have called us, and we would have had a greater victory had you called us. Once again, we can see that the Ephraimites struggle with that ugly thing called pride. When Jephthah, later on, Jephthah, the 8th judge, when he is confronted with the Ephraimites and a very similar situation and similar scenario, Jephthah doesn't use the wisdom that Gideon uses, and as a result, you will see that there is civil war. The men of Israel, as we look at the men of Israel in the time of Gideon, we will see that at this time, the men of Israel are already beginning to desire a king. As we go through, and as you go through the pages of the book of Judges, you will find that it's this king, the king of the Canaanites, the king of this, the king of the Amorites, the kings. Their kings came to make war with the Israelites. And although God raised up a deliverer, the men of Israel didn't have a king that they could automatically go to. And so the men of Israel begin to desire a king of their own. They come to Gideon with the request to make them their king. But Gideon, you see, he ends up refusing it. That says a lot for the man, a lot for Gideon. But unfortunately, we see that his son Abimelech, who's born to him by his concubine who's in Shechem, doesn't have the same heart as his father. And as you get to that story, you're going to see Abimelech. He betrays his father. He betrays his his half brothers, not his step brothers, but his half brothers. And what a horrible story that is. And then we see that the men of Shechem and men of Beth Milo promised to make him king, and he gladly accepts the kingship from them. Remember that the men of Shechem are his blood relatives through his mother's side. And so we see that Abimelech, the son of Gideon, has a much different heart than his father. I'm interrupting our video on the judges this week, and we will pick up where we left off as we continue next week in the judges. But I wanted to add some information that I felt might be helpful in your journey through this week to just bring more understanding. You will see that between each of the judges, almost all the judges, but there are a couple that there's no one mentioned that's oppressing them. But we find that there's this oppression by different people. They're not always the same people group. And the people groups that are mentioned are people groups that we've been introduced to before. But it's easy to forget where they're from and how they relate to the Israelites. And so I just wanted to take a moment to look at the different nations and the different people groups that oppressed Israel, so that as you read through, you can read through it with that understanding. We will find that there's a time where the Moabites oppressed them. You might remember who the Moabites are. They are descendants from a man named Moab. Who was Moab? Moab was Lot's son. We got to go clear back to Genesis, and we see when Abraham came to Canaan land that he brought with him Lot. And you might remember that at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot goes with his two daughters, and he has an incestuous relationship where his daughters get him drunk, and the oldest daughter has a son named Moab. This is the Moab who is the father of the Moabites. And then you will read that at one point it's the Ammonites. The understanding of this, we've got to go back to this same scenario with Lot, because the oldest daughter, you remember, got Lot drunk, and she has a son by him, and the youngest daughter did the same. She also has a son by her father, and that son's name was Ammon. And it's through this son, Ammon, that we get the Ammonites. The Midianites, once again, the Midianites, we've encountered them on many occasions. And who are the Midianites? The Midianites are the descendants of Abraham through his second wife. Remember, when Sarah dies, Abraham marries a second time, and he marries a woman named Keturah. And it's through Keturah that he has the son Midian, and this is where the Midianites come from. Then we have the Amalekites, and the Amalekites will continue to be a problem. We've seen them as a problem when the children of Israel were coming into the land, and now we see the Amalekites again. Actually, we see the problem with the Amalekites when they leave Egypt before they come into the land. Who are the Amalekites? Once again, this is one that we've looked at, but sometimes it's easy to forget because they just are names. And the Amalekites are descendants of Esau, and Esau has a grandson whose name is Amalek. Amalek is the father of the Amalekites. as we look at that, you can see that this family they're all related. And then we come to the Amorites. Now, the Amorites, to understand who the Amorites are, you have to go back farther than Abraham. And we find that the Amorites are descendants of Ham. You remember the sin of Ham with Noah, his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we know the sin of Ham. And when Noah wakes up, he says, cursed be Canaan. We've talked all about that. Well, Canaan is Ham's son. And the Amorites are descendants of Ham through his son Canaan. So that's why the Amorites are also referred sometimes to as Canaanites. And sometimes when it says the Canaanites, it can also be including the Amorites because they are descendants through Cain. Another one that we are going to be reading a lot about in the next couple of weeks and next few weeks are the Philistines. And once again, who are the Philistines? We have to go back a long time with them as well, because they are also descendants of Ham through his son Metzarine. And Metzarine, as we look at the descendants of Ham, we know that his son Canaan, the descendants came to Canaan's land, which is why it was called Canaan's land. But his son Metzarine is the one who is the father of the Egyptians. And at one time, the land of Egypt was called the land of Metzarine. And so we see that the Philistines are descendants, longtime descendants from this son of Noah, Ham. And so I hope you enjoy your journey this week, and I hope this reminder of who's who helps you to understand more as you journey with the Judges. Look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week.